Those that know me knew that I wanted to be a killer whale trainer from such a young age and work at SeaWorld, and that it's only been in recent years that my ambitions have changed. But I was such an advocate for cetacean captivity and wanted to spread the truth about what actually happens at facilities like SeaWorld. I decided to take a step back from all the controversy of supporting SeaWorld. For a couple of years now, I was just getting really tired of fighting people on my social media and in person and battling uneducated opinions. So I decided to take a step back from that and to refocus myself and find a way to tackle this controversial topic in a more effective way. So I have been fortunate enough to have worked with both exotic and domestic species now for the last 7 years. I've been a zookeeper, I've volunteered, I've been an intern, and I've worked alongside professionals and people working with both wild and captive cetacean species. So I've been really lucky to have seen both sides of in situ and ex situ conservation for these animals and been able to form a very unbiased, truthful opinion about what is actually happening and how I feel about the topic. So now that I have this first-hand experience, I want to start debunking the popular comments that I would get from people, both online and in person, and start to show the truth of what actually happens with these animals, whether that is in the wild or in captivity. So this leads me very nicely into today's video, where I want to tackle the most common comment I ever get about SeaWorld, and that is that SeaWorld forces their animals to perform tricks. I could make a 2-hour-long video just about this topic alone, but we're not going to do that. We're going to do it very quickly, and I'm going to go over very briefly the two main components about this statement, which is 1, forcing animals to perform anything, and 2, the actual behaviours that these animals are performing in the shows at SeaWorld, aka the tricks. Please know that there is extra reading to do on all of these topics, and that I'm not giving all of the information, just the main basis, in order for you to go away and hopefully find the rest of the research yourself. So first off, let's talk about forcing animals to exhibit any kind of behaviour. Now, without going too much into this topic alone, it's incredibly hard to force any animal to do anything it doesn't want to do without excessive amounts of force and abuse. It's fair to say that if SeaWorld and their trainers were directly abusing their animals and forcing them to do these behaviours, that it would be very noticeable to the public eye, and there is no way that they could pass their legislation and their zoo inspections for animal welfare. Even with the short amount of time I've worked in the zoological industry thus far, I know that animal welfare is of paramount and is the #1 priority of all zookeepers, animal trainers, veterinarians, you name it. It's so important, and that the smallest thing can be seen as a welfare breach. I think the thing to remember is that SeaWorld is a worldwide, highly recognised organisation, and they have been awarded and accredited several of the highest standards of animal welfare. It would be so hard for them to hide and get away with direct animal abuse of this kind of level without somebody knowing or picking it up, and they certainly would not be awarded for their animal welfare standards if this was actually happening. So this comes down to, how do they actually train their animals and their killer whales to perform these behaviours, whether that be for the public or for veterinarians or even just for the trainers themselves. There are so many different aspects to animal training, but to keep this condensed and to talk about the most important thing, we have to note that SeaWorld trainers use something called positive reinforcement when training their animals, and that is used from their fish and their sharks all the way up to their dolphins, belugas, pilot whales and their killer whales. What it means in its simplicity is that trainers are reinforcing desirable behaviours and ignoring those that are undesirable. In essence, it's telling the animal that they've done a good job, and if they haven't done what was desired of them from the trainer, that they get a chance to redo that behaviour again. There's no punishment involved, there's no beating, there's no abuse, there's no way that these trainers can force these animals. They're simply asking them if they can perform a behaviour, and if they do, they then get something in return to say thanks. So reinforcers can be anything that motivates an animal to exhibit a desired behaviour, and that could be anything from a primary reinforcer such as fish and squid to secondary reinforcers such as basketballs and ice cubes. Animal trainers will use a variety of different reinforcers during training sessions in order to keep the animals as stimulated and excited as possible, because that only means that they hopefully will want to continue to exhibit the desired behaviours. And if animals don't want to participate in these sessions and shows, then that's absolutely fine. There's no punishment involved, and there's certainly not withheld any food. In fact, the majority of reinforcement is given on top of their usual diets. Another key thing to remember is that we're talking about an apex predator. These animals can grow up to 30 feet long. There is no way that a person can force an animal of this intelligence and size to do something it simply doesn't want to do. I know from my own experience of training so many different species, from fish to goats to cows and lizards, you simply cannot force an animal to do something it doesn't want to do. The amount of energy and force it would take to do that, one, isn't worth it, and two, is obviously animal abuse. Also, the whole point of animal training is that you're supposed to be building a positive relationship with your animal so that they want to continue these behaviours for you. And if you're forcing them to do something they don't want to do, that relationship is going to be ruined very, very fast and you're never going to achieve anything. So I now want to tackle the second part of the statement, which was to do with tricks. And I want to talk about what a trick is and the difference between that and a natural behaviour. And if you've noticed, that's what I keep referring back to, is behaviours and not tricks, because a trick is simply an action taught to an animal that doesn't really serve a purpose, that's purely for entertainment and is usually quite unusual. And that can be anything from getting your dog to do a backflip to getting a dolphin to jump through a fire hoop. Whereas natural behaviours are what these animals would be exhibiting in the wild in order to hunt and communicate and get around and just in general survive. So the main goal and purpose of the shows at SeaWorld with Orca Encounter and One Ocean is not only to bring the public closer to these animals and inspire them, but it's also to educate them by showing them the natural behaviours of killer whales in the wild. Now you may be thinking, well, why don't you just go see killer whales in the wild then? What's the point in seeing them in captivity? Well, captivity offers such a unique opportunity to get up close with these animals and learn about them in this environment, because coming from somebody who's been a whale watcher and been a research intern and worked and studied these animals in the wild, seeing a killer whale in the wild is such a rare and unique opportunity. It doesn't come around often. It's so hard to just get on a boat, go out into the ocean and find killer whales. You can't get the same experience on a boat in the ocean that you can get at SeaWorld. And yes, there's nothing compares to seeing wild killer whales. It is simply the most amazing experience in the world. But what you learn from these animals at SeaWorld and the way that you're inspired is just, there's nothing like it. Also, a lot of the time when you're on a boat with wild killer whales, you have to be so lucky for them to be doing anything other than coming up for a breath and going back down for 6 to 8 minutes at a time and popping up meters and meters away. You have to be so lucky if they want to stay around your vessel and play and interact and breach and fluke slap, etc. So the fact that you can see all of these behaviours that they'd be exhibiting in the wild at SeaWorld in an hour show and then have it explained to you why these animals exhibit these behaviours is truly amazing. The main thing though is that the behaviours seen by the killer whales in the shows and demonstrations at SeaWorld are natural behaviours or extensions of natural behaviours that wild killer whales would be exhibiting. But I think the proof is in the pudding, so I'm now going to show you some clips of captive versus wild killer whales exhibiting the same behaviours to prove that the behaviours being trained at SeaWorld are natural or extensions of natural behaviours. The behaviour that you are currently looking at is called breaching. Now, killer whales and other cetacean species breach for many different reasons and in different ways. The main reasons can be to remove parasites from their skin and also to communicate with other animals in the water and also members of their pod. Sound does travel a lot faster in the water, but it can also be a great way for the social species to get to know each other and interact and simply to play. Some cetacean species will breach to attract mates within the area and also to establish dominance. Breaching can also be a predatory behaviour in which killer whales will use it to attack agile and much larger animals such as this bottlenose dolphin. This is a brilliant method to stun prey and hopefully protect themselves from any potentially dangerous defences the prey may have. Fluke throws and tail slaps are another strategic hunting technique that killer whales use to stun their prey. This again can be used to protect them from potentially dangerous prey species, such as the seal, which was flung about 40 feet into the air. This behaviour at SeaWorld is known as the thrasher, but in places in the southern hemisphere such as Argentina, killer whales in the wild will deliberately beach themselves in intentional stranding events in order to hunt seal and sea lion pups on the beaches. Although risky and potentially fatal, the small amount of orcas that have learnt to do this behaviour have about a 50% success rate when hunting seal pups. The thrushing behaviour you see again helps stun the prey before they drown them. At top speed, killer whales can reach around 35 miles per hour, and this can be used in order to wave wash seals off of ice floes in the Antarctic Peninsula. It's another technique used by killer whales to stun much more larger, dangerous animals, as this matriarch can be seen doing to this great white shark. As with most of these behaviours, fluke slapping is another way that killer whales will communicate with members of their pod, and to also remove parasites from their skin. While working as a research intern in Monterey Bay, I was lucky enough to capture this footage of two pods that came together to socialise, fluke slapping at the surface in a demonstration I can only describe as play. No one's 100% sure why killer whales in the wild will fluke wave or peduncle wiggle, but it's a behaviour I wanted to add because I've seen it myself both in captivity and the wild, and it's one that I think is absolutely amazing. Now this behaviour on the left is known as a spy hop. Killer whales and other cetaceans spy hop for many different reasons, including to help them hunt and get a better idea of their surroundings, and simply out of curiosity. Whereas this matriarch was obtaining her bearings in order to work out the best hunting strategy for this poor seal. Orcas have a wide visual range and peripheral vision in order to help them locate prey. But again, orcas will exhibit this behaviour in order to interact and play when they're trying to get to know each other better. I have to say, it's got to be one of my favourite behaviours. This behaviour, demonstrated by Corky, is known as a peck slap or pectoral slap, which you can also see CA51B Jimmy exhibiting here. Now this behaviour here is an extension of a spy hop, in which orcas will get a better view of their surroundings above the water. Now I witnessed this behaviour in the wild with this particular killer whale that came vertically out the water with a sea lion carcass in its mouth. I think he was just showing off the success of his hunt and also getting a better view of the boat that was just to the right of this picture. Most people on social media think that this animal here is depressed as it's on the surface not moving, when in actuality it's resting in a behaviour called logging. Orcas are conscious breathers and have to stay alert when resting or sleeping, and they go into a state called unihemispheric sleep where they only rest half of their brain at a time. Now orcas sleep in many different ways, but the footage that you're currently seeing and that you saw of the killer whale at SeaWorld is known as logging, where they will rest on their side. Usually a pod of killer whales will go into a sleep pattern of around 1 to 6 hours.
Now as you can see, those behaviours were very similar, if not identical. But if you still don't believe me, I highly recommend having a look at Orca Encounters San Diego or Orlando SeaWorld to see for yourself that these shows are educational and that the trainers are teaching people about why these animals would be exhibiting these behaviours in the wild. So that was something completely different. I did think about maybe doing more of a debunking misinformation on cetacean captivity series. If that's something you'd be interested in, please let me know. So there you go guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video and you learned something new from it. Thank you so much for watching and I look forward to seeing you guys in my next video.